some wonderful promises to them cannot deliver in a fair, good faith collective bargaining arrangement. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, there are examples where employees have then sought to decertify because of that letdown. Well, Mr. Speaker, with Bill 102, that will never happen because they will be guaranteed a contract under first contract arbitration. And the sky is the limit about what can be promised to employees. A sad exercise. And then when that contract is imposed on both sides, it will either meet the promises that were made or it won't. But that won't matter then, Mr. Speaker, will it? Because it'll be an arbitrator who will have determined the contract. This is the great gift that the NDP are giving to their union friends, those that are paid to sign up people. Rather than allow employees to make a decision in their own economic interest, using their own judgment, free of influence, about whether they wish to organize collectively and negotiate collectively or not, which we all agree is the right way to go. They have come up with a new way to take it out of the hands of those very employees and give a new club to those that are paid to sign up members for their union. That is the message that the government is sending behind the scenes to those that are determined to have first contract arbitration. But, Mr. Speaker, the bigger message to all Nova Scotians, to all those around the world who might like to consider an investment in our province, create a few jobs in our province, is that they have a whole new risk that they have to consider. After all, Mr. Speaker, let's just go back for a moment to where this all started, which is the Bill 100, which in its own was a series of amendments to the Trade Union Act. In fact, Bill 100 placed a preamble in the Trade Union Act, as members will remember. That preamble contained some important principles, such as that employees and employers ought to be able to engage in free collective bargaining, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would suggest to you that when the end result is an imposed agreement on both sides, in the case of a first contract, when it is imposed, it is not free. And for that reason, Bill 102 offends the very preamble that this government put in the Trade Union Act. It is not free when it is imposed on you. The cost, there's the financial cost, first of all, which is out of your hands. But the cost in bad relations, the cost in destroyed relationship between an employer and his employees, or her employees, the cost to a business that has no idea how it's going to manage from this point forward is great. It is an offense to free collective agreements, to free collective bargaining, because when someone else imposes it on you, it is no longer free. Mr. Speaker, the preamble that this government placed in the Trade Union Act last fall with Bill 100 also says it's important that we have a process of collective bargaining that results in good relations between employer and employee. That's in the preamble, that they want, theoretically, there to be a good relationship at the end of the day between Nova Scotia employers and Nova Scotia employees. Well, we all agree with that. But when you impose, by force of law, a contract on two parties, never mind which one you secretly are supporting, when you impose a contract on two parties, it is not free and it is not conducive to good relations between those two parties. It can only lead to a breakdown in the productive relationship that would exist otherwise between an employer and employee group. It can only lead to a a less productive enterprise. It can only lead to bad feelings, to hurt feelings, to resentment, Mr. Speaker, on one part or another, or potentially both. Bill 102 is an offense to the very preamble that this government put in the Trade Union Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's always important to listen to the arguments of the other side. And I know that the NDP likes to point out that there is some form, well, that there is first contract arbitration, let's just say that, this is how they would put it, in many other provinces in Canada. Well, let's take a look at that, Mr. Speaker. We looked at the preamble to the Trade Union Act. Let's take a look at what exists around first contract arbitration in some other parts of Canada. Mr. Speaker, in British Columbia, in Newfoundland, in Quebec, in Ontario, they have first contract arbitration, but it is not the same as the one that is before this House today. It is not the same as the first contract arbitration that the NDP wants to impose on Nova Scotia. In each of those provinces, Mr. Speaker, a party must appeal to the Minister of Labour or his or her equivalent in that province when they're at an impasse, and they must provide evidence of bad faith negotiating before they can proceed any further. And then the minister has a choice, and that choice is whether to refer it to the Labour Board for an imposed arbitration or not. It is not automatic, and it requires evidence of bad faith negotiating. That is a very, very different system than the scheme that the NDP want for our province, Mr. Speaker, where it's automatic, where you go right to the Labour Board, where all you have to do is show that there was an impasse, a disagreement, a gap. You don't have to show bad faith. You don't have to show harm or hardship. All you have to do is disagree to get to first contract arbitration. Mr. Speaker, in Saskatchewan, when two parties negotiating their first contract can't agree, either party can appeal to the Labour Board, but they must provide evidence of an impasse. That still is a higher standard than what the NDP want for our province. In British Columbia, which the NDP here have cited as an example, you have to actually get to a strike vote before you can appeal for first contract arbitration. You have a strike vote, and then it has to go to a moderator to try and help the parties come to agreement, knowing a strike vote has already been taken and passed in British Columbia. Others may wish to elaborate on this more later. And when the moderator fails, if the moderator fails, then you can go to an arbitrator, Mr. Speaker. But that arbitrator does not have to impose a contract in this situation. He or she may, but they're not required to. For example, they may determine that the strike vote is allowed to proceed, that the collective bargaining process, including the economic consequences of strikes and lockouts, should be allowed to proceed to its logical conclusion. That arbiter has that choice. He can choose to avoid becoming the third party that imposes a solution and allow the two parties to work it out in the normal way. That is not an example that anyone who has done their homework could possibly agree is relevant to what this bill imposes on Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. In the case of the federal government, which the NDP are keen to cite, Mr. Speaker, when two parties under federal legislation are unable to agree, it is to the Minister of Labour that they make their appeal. And the Minister of Labour decides whether to send them to an arbiter or not. The Minister can say no. There is another check on this imposition system that the NDP wants for our province. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, It is considered, the federal system, it is considered to be the one least likely to end up in first contract arbitration. Now, Mr. Speaker, guess which province has the harshest form of first contract arbitration? What a surprise. What a surprise. It is Manitoba. Manitoba is the only other province besides Nova Scotia where you don't have to exercise bad faith if you're a party to a first contract negotiation. You can appeal directly to a labor board or to an arbiter, and that there is an automatic imposition of a contract. They say 6. Fact is, there's only one that is even close to what they want to do to Nova Scotia, and it's Manitoba, which, as we know, has been the source of many of the ideas that the NDP have been determined to bring here. Mr. Speaker, the harshest, my point is the harshest form exists in Manitoba, and of all of the options, even if you did agree that this is a good idea, which we certainly don't in any of these forms, but even if you did want to give it a try, they went right to the harshest example, where it's an automatic first contract, where you don't have to show bad faith, where you just declare that you've reached an impasse and a contract will be handed to you. Manitoba is the only example of that, Mr. Speaker. I want to share one other item from the report on collective bargaining in Canada in 2010, Mr. Speaker. I'm just trying to keep track of the time here. If you could just let me know where I am. Do I? Oh, great. Well, I've got lots of stuff.
There's approximately 13 minutes left,
okay.
Honourable Member.
Thank you. It's barely enough to scratch the surface. But like the member that spoke before, I will begin my wind down shortly, Mr. Speaker. In that report on collective bargaining in Canada 2010, and I will table this in a moment, Mr. Speaker, they reported 305 successfully concluded collective agreements in our country last year. 128 of them were in the private sector, and 177 of them were in the public sector. In total, they covered 1,245,670 Canadians. To break that down, there were 396,340 private sector Canadian workers who successfully reached a collective agreement, bargained in good faith, and there were 849,330 public sector workers, Canadians, who successfully reached a collective agreement, bargained in good faith, for a total number of agreements of 305, 1,245,670 working Canadians. But what's also interesting on this page from this report from the Government of Canada, Mr. Speaker, is that it also tracks the average length of time that the negotiations took for all of those agreements. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that in Canada, it takes on average 9.9 months to negotiate a collective agreement. And these, by the way, are not only first contracts, these are all contracts. These include hundreds of people who bargain in good faith who have experience as collective bargainers. And it still took on average 9.9 months. In the private sector, Madam Speaker, that average was 8.6 months. Basically, three-quarters of a year. In the public sector, it was 10.6 months, almost a year, to reach a collective agreement on average. On average. Well, Madam Speaker, guess how much time Bill 102 gives the parties involved in their first contract ever to negotiate an agreement before they can go to an arbiter. 120 days. 4 months. Less than half of the time it takes experienced negotiators to reach an agreement. Sorry, I will table that document, by the way, Madam Speaker, for all members to see, particularly the government members, who need to know that they are going to provide to the employer and the employee who are new at first contract bargaining less than half the time it took all the contracts in Canada on average to be reached. And if they're not able to do it in that time, that short amount of time, off you go automatically, no evidence of bad faith, go to the arbiter. And you'll have a first contract imposed on you. Now, Madam Speaker, come on. Come on. 9.9 months on average for everybody. And we're going to get, yes, for renegotiation, which presumably, when you already have an agreed upon collective agreement, you already have experience negotiating on both sides, it's quicker. When it's your first one, when neither side is experienced at negotiating contracts, you're going to give them less than half the time, and then you're going to impose a contract. Madam Speaker, that is nonsensical. The NDP aren't even going to give collective bargaining a chance for those involved in a first contract negotiation. Not even half a chance. Less than half a chance. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker. I think as I wind down, it's important that I point out none of these things are done in isolation. None of these things should stand on their own. They have to fit into the bigger picture. I've drawn the bigger picture about a world economy that is on the precipice. I've drawn the bigger, more positive picture about a great opportunity that they will screw up if they go down this road. But first contract's not just the only item that needs to be taken into consideration in these perilous times, coupled with a time of opportunity. You have to add first contract arbitration to what was done with Bill 100, to the cost of everyday items in our province, which were driven up in large part by a 2% HST increase. You have to add to that the bite-the-bullet electricity plan, which foresees ever increasing costs of electricity in our province. You have to add to that the behind-the-scenes, behind closed doors regulatory changes that the NDP have made to make it easier to organize collectively. All of those things have to fit together, Madam Speaker. And when you do put them all together, you do see that far from having a strategy to increase employment, far from having a strategy to actually help Nova Scotians who need a job, who want to build some personal wealth, want to save for their retirement, who want to get ahead, the government has systematically, step by step by step, made it harder, made it more expensive, made it more complicated, made it more unfair, made it more risky. And just like everything else that they've proposed in this House over the last 2.5 years, they are driven by some behind-the-scenes force, an ideology, or a friend that pushes them to do these things. And it may be cost-free to the NDP, Madam Speaker, but it is Nova Scotians who pay the price. It is Nova Scotians who pay more in HST. It is Nova Scotians who pay more and are told to bite the bullet under their electricity plan. It is Nova Scotians who are told that who will lose jobs and lose future jobs because of this type of bill, Bill 102, Madam Speaker. That is what is so offensive about what is being done here today. And I will say, as the MLA for Cumberland South, that I raise the example of Polycello and where they're headed if this bill goes forward. But I also want to point out, Madam Speaker, that there are a number of employers, like Oxford Frozen Foods, which employs a great number of people in Cumberland County, a non-unionized workforce. Not because their employees aren't allowed to organize, of course they are, they have that right. But they have an employer that pays a fair wage, provides housing and other modern progressive benefits, that works with the employees on building up a great company, that employs a big part of Oxford and the county of Cumberland, that will see this as a new risk to their business, just at a time when they need a new risk the least. You know, Madam Speaker, the Wild Blueberry Association annual meeting was just this last weekend. And for those that follow these things, you'll know that our blueberry crop, which is the best in the world, is down. It's down. You can debate why. Be the weather, could be the honeybees, it could be any number of things, but it's down. Madam Speaker, this is an important export of Cumberland County. It's an important export of all Nova Scotia. We have a world-leading company that processes blueberries in Oxford, Oxford Frozen Foods, which has built up a dynamic business in a non-unionized workforce, and everyone agrees that is the way to go. And now that's going to be put at risk. Madam Speaker, there are many other examples. I'd like to go on and give you some more. Ropac Industries in Spring Hill would be another. But I think at this point I will sum it all up. Today, the way I summed it up when it was introduced, it is a bad idea at a bad time and for bad reasons, Madam Speaker. And with those words, I will take my place and hope that the debate will go on in a happier outcome than the one it appears the government wants us to reach is indeed reached. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Kings West on an introduction.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for that opportunity. Today we have it's kind of a rare and at the same time a special day. We have a second Kenny McCaskill in the gallery today. And Kenny also has a very strong Cape Breton heritage, but now lives in Berwick. Is my association president. And I'd like to ask all members of the House to give Kenny a warm welcome here today.
I welcome all guests to our gallery today. Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise today and speak on Bill 102, which is entitled An Act to Prevent Unnecessary Labour Disruptions and Protect the Economy, and then it says by amending a certain chapter of the Trade Union Act. So it is an amendment to the Trade Union Act. We've actually been, I guess, treated to quite a few people speaking on this act already, and perhaps we'll hear from more again. And I think a lot of points have been made. And certainly the members of the legislature know that generally when I speak on any bill, I like to look at it for its merit. I like to examine it and see what it's going to do that will improve the province. And I tend to, by and large, stick to the matter at hand. So I'm sure, Madam Speaker, you'll be pleased to know that. Yes, I think it is important that we look at this on its merit and that we consider what exactly is being proposed here. And, you know, honestly, this bill just seems to be completely missing the mark of where Nova Scotians' concerns are today and under the current difficulties economically in the light of the job losses that we have been experiencing in this province. You know, and very unfortunately in the last number of months we've had just one after the other in rural Nova Scotia announcements of job losses and announcements of a downturn or cutbacks. And it's been very difficult, and I'm sure it's difficult for the government as they look at all of that news, the downgrading of our growth forecasts, which are not officially announced yet by the Finance Department, but are bound to come. And in fact, even the Finance Minister has said they will come when we finally get the next quarterly update in December. But we know even today that it is coming, that other provinces have downgraded their their growth forecasts as well, and the federal government has made an acknowledgement of that. So we're looking forward to hearing from the minister when that does come. And so certainly in Nova Scotia, but overall the Canadian numbers are down, and I think the minister agrees with that, and we will not make the growth targets that are forecast for our province that were the basis for our budget this year, the basis for the revenue that we're going to receive. Well, that's just a bit of backdrop. I mean, we're in a time of turmoil, and some of the answers in question period from the government ministers have pointed to that turmoil, have said these are forces beyond our control. But guess what, Madam Speaker? This bill before us is within the control of government. And it really is a foolhardy move to go forward with this for a number of reasons. One is where the government should be placing their emphasis today is on the need for creating a stable economy, jobs, improving and shoring up the competitiveness of our province, you know, building a province where young people have opportunity and will stay. And I can tell you, I know of people in my riding who have been saying goodbye to their children, seeing them with their U-Hauls heading out of the province. And that's been the one I'm thinking of right off the top of my head is because of the closure of the New Waterford call centre, that where many jobs were lost in New Waterford as a result of that. We've heard nothing from the government on that, and a member from Cape Breton South has been monitoring that. There's been no word, no acknowledgement, even concern indicated about that. And that's just one major job loss and one major company closing. We've had concerns right across the province, and it seems if the members of the opposition don't mention these concerns, they go unnoticed. Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker, I'm so sorry, I have to look up. Madam Speaker, the bill, Bill 102, and speaking to the title, actually says it is protecting the economy. I think that goes beyond presumptuous use of the language, really, to suggest that introducing first contract arbitration is somehow going to protect our economy. What we're hearing from major employers in the province is the exact opposite. And I'm sure the members of the government caucus and cabinet are aware of the article that appeared on Wednesday, November 2nd. It was an opinion piece that was in the Chronicle Herald, and it was signed by, it says at the bottom, the article was submitted by an employer coalition of 18 associations from across Nova Scotia. And when I looked at another letter that was sent by the same coalition, I saw 16 at that time. It was obviously a growing coalition because in October they wrote to the minister, and there were 16 at least on this list. The letter was copied to the Premier, to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development. It was copied to the leader of the Liberal Party, the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, and to members of the Labour Management Review Committee as well, and the Labour Services Branch. So we got wide circulation. It wasn't a secret letter, and I think many of us have seen it. I'd be happy to table it if I could after I speak to it. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The letter itself, as I say, what I thought was most telling, and I can cover some of the points that are in it, but really a lot of the points have been raised here by members. They've been raised because of people we've talked to, business owners. You know, we had in the gallery today Leanne Hashey representing small business, and Luke Urjevic again representing the Restaurant Association here in Atlantic Canada. They're all expressing concern about this bill. But some of the large employers and groups that are in this coalition of employers include the Atlantic Building Supply Dealers Association, again, Federation of Independent Business, who I've mentioned, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, the Construction Association of Nova Scotia, Chamber of Commerce, Road Builders Association, Home Builders Association. We've got the Automobile Dealers Association, PharmaSave Atlantic, the Retail Council of Canada, and more. And so those are just some that jump out at us. And what they are primarily saying is that this is a terrible time for the government to be considering changes to the Trade Union Act and to introduce any changes like this. They're just saying this is not the time to send out a signal that will alarm or even disquiet business. Why would we do it if it makes them uncomfortable, if it makes them think that there's a deeper conspiracy, if there's some other further moves that are going to follow this and it's going to be detrimental in the workplace? And again, it's because we want employers to think that Nova Scotia is the best province to come to, the most business-friendly province, the place where they'll get, the welcome mat will be rolled out. I often think back to New Brunswick when, not that many years ago, they were in a much worse situation, and their premier used to phone up companies that were even remotely thinking of relocating there and give them all the reasons why they should come to New Brunswick and why they would be welcome, and how that the environment would be good for those companies to come there. And you know who I'm speaking of. I'm speaking of Premier McKenna at that time, Madam Speaker. Frank McKenna took an active interest in promoting his province and trying to make sure that businesses would come there and employ New Brunswickers so they wouldn't be leaving at that time for Nova Scotia or for where other parts, perhaps out west. And we know we have a flood of people leaving our workforce, leaving our province to find work elsewhere because they've lost their jobs, or for young people because they can't get a foothold in the economy here. And with that kind of backdrop, wouldn't we be going out of our way, or shouldn't we, as a province and as individual MLAs and certainly as members of the government, shouldn't it be a priority to create a good, stable, productive economy rather than throwing something into the works that really is not a priority for Nova Scotians? It's not something that they were asking for. There was no compelling reason to go here, and other members have gotten up and have suggested that this is a sort of payback to unions. And I know that if we go back to a number of recent elections, not just the last one, but we can go back to 2006 as well, in that election, and there was definitely a great deal of support that was voiced on doorsteps from union members for the NDP party. And it got very blatant in 2009 when union members actually said, we've received instructions, we've received encouragement, we've received, all kinds of reasons that we should be voting for the NDP this time. And why were the unions taking such an active interest in supporting one party over another, or trying to direct their members one way over the other? It was because they expected union-friendly legislation. They expected a change to the environment here in Nova Scotia that would in some way tip the scales and make things more beneficial to them. And again, as the member from Cape Breton South said, I support unions and the benefits that they bring to their workers, but I don't like it when unions union members are bullied or pushed in one particular way or another. I think that the union leaders need to respect the individuality of their members, and that throwing, as I say, a lot of support behind one party and instructing members to vote for that party, I think goes a little bit far in our democracy. And certainly, if you remember 2006, I had the, I guess, the privilege to run against the executive director of the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union, who ran in the riding of Clayton Park, and we had a very fair and I think a very respectful race. But in that race, letters were sent from the NSGEU president to every member of the NSGEU who lived in the Clayton Park riding. I mean, that really is an affront. That's trying to manipulate the outcome of an election, and I think use private information and undue influence, really, in the outcome of an election. And that actually did not go well for the union leadership in that case, because I think people saw it for what it was, that it was being pushy. At a minimum, we could say it was being pushy to the members of that union, and trying to again, I think, take too active a role in an election process. And at the time, as I say, it was a close race, but I was able to win in that election, and I think it was because people realized that they weren't going to be bullied or pushed or intimidated in any way to vote a certain way. And it did not benefit, another candidate who was, in fact, in her own right, a very capable and she is a very capable woman. But at the same time, I think that it did not benefit her in any way to be using that kind of union influence. And I think that there's a similarity here to this act, which is, the amendments to the Trade Union Act. Is like, really, is there not a sense that this is something that the unions have been expecting from this NDP government, and now they're getting it 2.5 years into the mandate? It's time to move on that commitment that was made, obviously, at some point, I'd say prior to 2009, I'd say prior to 2006, because of the pressure on the doorsteps then. And I'd say that it is wrong. And this is the wrong time. That really is the message. I know we've heard from a lot of other members, and they've told you about the economy, and we've discussed, all the members of the House have heard about the economy and the bigger issues that are affecting Nova Scotians. And that really is the message that I'd like to leave you with, is that this is not a necessary piece of legislation. And Madam Speaker, as you know, we have in the House the large portrait of Joseph Howe. And downstairs in our lobby, we have some of his well, we have a display really that commemorates Joseph Howe, former Premier and Lieutenant Governor of this province, among other things. And Joseph Howe said that he measured legislation by the sentence, is it just, is it right, is it in the public good? And I'm looking to the clerk to make sure I've quoted that correctly, but I think I've got it. So 3 tests. Is the legislation just? Is it right? And is it in the public good? I'm not sure I can do that. Anyway, those 3 things really are a test that I like to look to as well. And I know other members of the House admire Joseph Howe, and some of them would like to see a day in his honor. And I think that it's important that that get mentioned at least once every session. But, you know, what he left us with, the legacy that he left, it's counting. I'm looking to the Minister of Communities to take up this charge, because the Minister of Communities, and understands the vitality that this would bring to our community to have a winter holiday in memory of, I would say, our most illustrious parliamentarian in Nova Scotia, somebody who left his indelible mark on journalism and on our province, and certainly left a huge legacy from the 1800s to today. We remember him well. And I think that our young people need to know more of the message that he brought. So again, in looking at legislation and saying, looking at Bill 102, we should look at, is it just, is it right, is it in the public good? Is there a demand for it? Is there a need? Are we correcting something? Is there an injustice that needs to be corrected or altered? Is there something missing in our province? Well, is there an injustice? I don't see an injustice to anybody. And again, if we look at the detail of the bill, and I know the minister in her opening comments and a couple of times in question period has pointed to the fact that every political stripe over in Canada has adopted first contract arbitration, and taken on the surface, that seems to be reasonable. I mean, I'm not an expert in this bill, what first contract arbitration is, but having sat here in the legislature and listened to other speakers over the last number of days, we now know there's a difference between one act and the other, and there's a difference between provinces, and not everybody has gone about it the same way. Some are really, in fact, more draconian than others. Some are not giving business the same opportunity, and employees, frankly, the same opportunity to reach an agreement before first contract arbitration would kick into play. And I think that's very, very important, because it's wrong to suggest that for example, my party, the Liberal Party, has supported first contract arbitration, when in fact, the legislation they have supported would have been much milder, would have required more steps before it was ever called into play, would have left more discretion with the Minister of Labour before it was ever called into play. In this particular bill, which is before us, I think one of the biggest things that's missing is that demonstration of bad faith, that you shouldn't take people who are in the midst of collective bargaining and ask them then to if they haven't come to an agreement within a short period of time, and correct me, but I think it's only a matter of weeks that this bill calls for, and if they haven't reached an agreement on their first contract, it immediately goes to an arbitrator, and you'll have something that was a contract that's provided by the arbitrator rather than by the two parties who should be in good faith negotiating that contract. And as I say, what I'm missing here in this bill is that there doesn't need to be a demonstration that there has been bad faith or that the parties are not acting in good faith. That doesn't need to be demonstrated in order for this amendment to the bill to kick in and force a first contract arbitration. I think that's a fundamental flaw. If the government's determined to move on this bill and determined to see it pass, I think it would be so much better if there were a few more provisions put into play that would allow the two parties, both the employers and the employees, to work out an agreement on their own, or even to follow what is currently in the Act. And I was interested, in looking into this and reading over how it currently works to understand collective bargaining just a little better, Madam Speaker. And going through that, I realized that we already have a lot of provisions in the Act to help parties come to an agreement. First of all, if there's an impasse in labour negotiations under current legislation, parties can request a conciliator. So that's your first point that you would go to if you were having an impasse. And that is being used in our public service unions and others, people at any point, not just with a first contract, but with any contract. So we already have that. If it fails when you go to a conciliator, you can then request a mediator. And if that fails, you can request an industry panel review, it says. So there's 3 steps right there that employers and employees can turn to try and reach an agreement that they're both happy with. But now we're losing that right, and we're really, in effect, gutting the idea of collective agreements in this, or collective bargaining, I guess, in this Act, because we're taking that away and creating instead a system that's going to be imposed, really, that will just kick into play and be imposed. And some people have suggested this is going to make it far easier to unionize some workplaces that are not unionized, because you can actually say, well, there's no threat of a strike. There, if you run into difficulties with your employer, there can't be a lockout, and you can't strike, because we're going to ensure that you get a contract right off the bat. And it's interesting to note in other provinces that where this has been brought into play, that after the first contract is signed, in the next round of negotiations, there's a higher rate of strikes. Madam Speaker, you may not have been aware of that, but looking at the history in other provinces, there's actually a higher rate of strikes on the second contract, because the first contract's been proposed and brought into play, under the rules of this first contract arbitration. It has been imposed on both parties. And when that time frame elapses and a second contract comes up, to be negotiated, there tends to be much higher rate of strikes and labor disruption as a result, because, one or the other party is dissatisfied with what was provided by the arbitrator. So I think that's a little cautionary note too for government in suggesting that this may encourage unionization, and it will certainly expedite the first contract that any new union is going to have, but it may lead to labor disruption in the second instance. And often it's very important to be looking at what the ramifications are. When you make one change, there's often unforeseen other changes that come. And we see it often in accounting where I've worked as a management accountant, and you might change one parameter or one way of, say, acknowledging perhaps good work, and find that it has some negative impacts, that people start to work differently because they're looking to get a bonus or get whatever it was that had been set in place as an incentive. It can have a negative effect or the opposite effect. And maybe this will too. Maybe in going down this road, we'll find that we'll have more labor disruption than we ever have had before. And again, when I started my remarks today, Madam Speaker, I was speaking about the whether or not there's a need for this. And I think that we should go back to that and just have a quick look at what the current labor sort of situation is in our province. And it's very stable. It is tranquil, exactly. The best word to use to describe our labor and management relations right now is very tranquil. There is not a lot of labor disruption. It's very seldom that we've seen any troubles. I think we saw that there's only been 3 orders since 1998 to impose a collective agreement because of collective bargaining failing. Now, if that's true, and that in fact was in the letter that the Coalition of Employers had brought forward as well, Madam Speaker, they had said that we understand that since 1998, the Labour Board has only issued 3 orders to bargain in faith. In fact, officials from the Labour Department report that in most cases agreements are negotiated amicably. So tranquil, amicable. Seldom are we seeing any disruptions whatsoever. And yet we're here today, you know, spending valuable time in the legislature looking at first contract arbitration, which is absolutely unnecessary. It is not needed to correct or right a wrong. It's not needed to improve our labor relations. It's not going to create one job in this province. It may not be a job killer. I know that the Conservative Party has been pushing the idea that this is completely catastrophic. It's not that I think it's catastrophic. I think it is a diversion. I think it is not the place where our efforts should be focused today in Nova Scotia, spending time in the legislature and having this be the preeminent bill that will probably pass this session. You know, why can't we be looking at bills that are going to be improving our competitiveness as a province, perhaps creating some new opportunities for Nova Scotians, whether they be, we talked today in question period about Nova Scotians that are underrepresented in the workforce, Aboriginals, women, disabled Nova Scotians or African Nova Scotians. We need to come up with programs that are going to help people participate fully, and we need to find the jobs and the opportunities. And that can be done through some government programs. That can be a stimulus or a support. But Madam Speaker, we don't see anything like that. And we could be here, you know, till the cows come home. We could stay in the House for months talking about other bills and acts and issues that are not prominent and high on the priority of Nova Scotians. And that's what I really feel is important, is that the government spend more time looking at the kind of initiatives that are needed, policy and acts and legislation that are needed to set this province on a stronger and more stable path for the future. You know, it concerns me greatly that we are not really performing I think to the level that we should be. We have resources, we have you know, wonderful universities, and they support our economy, and we have a lot going for us in this province, but we don't seem to be able to capitalize on it. And I think part of the problem is a very uncompetitive tax regime. We have you know, personal taxes, corporate taxes, small business taxes that one after the other are the outliers, the highest in the country, the second highest in the country. Sometimes we're the only place that has some of these taxes. We have our tax brackets, which are the amount of money at which you enter a new bracket, the cutoff points where your rates increase. We have them at a much lower level than the federal government does. So you pay quite a different level of tax at the end of the day, because we're spending or paying more to the province of Nova Scotia than we really should if we had advanced those tax brackets in lockstep with the federal government, as they recognize inflation and rising incomes and the fact that it takes more money today to be at the poverty threshold. It takes more earning today to be anywhere near middle class. And so we have to up those amounts so that they reflect where people's earning power really is. And our brackets do not do that. And we therefore are taking more taxes from low-income Nova Scotians than we should. We absolutely are. And that makes it a very unattractive place if you are looking at moving back to Nova Scotia, which is exactly what we want to do in terms of the opportunity from the Irving Shipyard contract, Madam Speaker. We're hoping that people will come home to fill those jobs, or new people will choose to join us, or immigrants will see Nova Scotia as the best province to come to and make their home. But if we're going to get there, we have to create a little bit, we have to narrow that gap and create a more competitive tax environment. And when we do narrow the gap between ourselves and other provinces, it will not be such a deal breaker for people when they're looking at the impact on their own lives. And I think we know that one of our biggest problems facing the province is going to be, you know, having people here that have the skills and that are young and have the ability to fill the jobs that are going to come in the future, both through the Irving shipbuilding contract and other jobs that we hope to create and other industries we hope to attract, because our people are our best resource right now. And yet we're not doing the things that are going to help our people get the skills they need, and we're not doing the things to attract the jobs that are going to match with those skills. And here we are talking about first contract arbitration and debating Bill 102, which, as I said, I have no idea who named this bill, Madam Speaker, to suggest that this bill will prevent unnecessary labor disruptions when we live in a province which has almost no labor disruptions. And it also says this bill has the power to protect the economy, because it's named an act to protect the economy. You know, it really, I can't see the connection to that at all. And I know we get very creative in naming our bills. We like them to say a lot when they're read into the record. That's certainly important when you're in opposition, because often they don't get mentioned again. So it is important that the title at least be quite descriptive. But for this particular case, I noticed when the House Leader for the government side actually said, he called Bill 102 the Trade Union Act. Well, that's really what it is, an amendment to the Trade Union Act. So that was much more to the point, absolutely. Yes. Anyway, as I said, we were looking at other acts too in other provinces to see if they had made any difference in those provinces, whether they had improved anything by their introduction. And the one thing that jumped out at me was the actual increase in labor disruptions on the second contract. When both the employer and the employees have enjoyed whatever length of time the first contract is sort of forced upon them through the arbitrator, if it's a year or 2 years. After that, they tended to have labor disruption because they were not satisfied with it. And I think that it just points to the fact that nobody's really done the homework on the ramifications and perhaps the unexpected outcomes of passing a bill like Bill 102. And we haven't looked at the provinces and the jurisdictions that have better legislation. And when I see an adoption of Manitoba legislation, I'm reminded that so many of the advisors to the government have come from Manitoba, because when the government was first elected in 2009, they had to reach out. There were no people with government experience and no workers with, people who work in government that had that experience for the NDP here in Atlantic Canada. And they reached out to Western Canada. And so we have people, Madam Speaker, who have come here to join us in Nova Scotia and help the government craft legislation and perhaps come up with an agenda and a way to hopefully meet the promises that were made during the election. But we have seen that many of those promises have fallen by the wayside. And I don't think it's the fault of the advisors and the support staff that have come in. I think it's a question of the government losing touch with some of the priorities of Nova Scotians. And today, I think the government, in their heart of hearts, I do believe the Premier and the members of the Cabinet and the members of the caucus on the governing side of the House know that the biggest concern for all of us is to maintain employment and to maintain the stable, harmonious, amicable, tranquil relationship that we currently have between labor and business and the employers. And so setting out to introduce a bill like we've seen here today, Bill 102, is just heading in the wrong direction. It's taking valuable government time and staff and effort and time here in the House on the wrong track, on an issue that is not a burning issue for Nova Scotians, and in fact isn't a burning issue for union members. Those that are in unions now have collective agreements, they're on a bargaining schedule and have everything in place. So we're talking about something that will benefit very few in this province. And I think that, again, it comes back to rewarding union organizers and rewarding union top brass or administrators who want to see more people join unions and want to create more unionized environments. But this is not the time to be going there. And Madam Speaker, article that I referred to that came from the Employer Coalition has the title on it, Nova Scotia should focus on real problems like the economy. And I think that that is the message that you've been hearing from the Liberal caucus over the last number of days as we've begun to discuss this. The Liberal caucus believes that the economy and jobs and securing a more prosperous future in this province is what really matters, and not bending or kowtowing to any particular interest group, no matter what sense of entitlement they may have. You know, it's not about speaking to your base, as they say. It's about looking at the problems that you've been elected to, that government has been elected to deal with. And it's unfortunate that the government is at the helm at a time when there's a great deal of uncertainty, that the NDP find themselves finally in the seat of power at a time when world news is bad and there's downturns in other places and instability in the economies elsewhere. That's really unfortunate because it may have hampered some of the plans that the NDP had. Many of us held out some high hopes that we'd see something that might help Nova Scotia. I'm not a member, obviously, of the NDP party. I sit on the Liberal side of the House, and I believe in Liberal values, Liberal, the history of the Liberal Party. The background that we have, I think, is strong, and I think governing from the middle is really the best way to govern in Canada. And there's a reason why it has worked so well in Canada.
You agree with that? I know you.
But yeah, I absolutely do. But the middle ground is definitely the best ground. This is where you take the best ideas from both ideological ends of the spectrum. We find the Conservative Party very ideological. You can hear it again and again. And don't they speak often about the Fraser Institute? And we know what the Minister of Finance thinks about the Fraser Institute. Then, of course, we have the other ideological side of the spectrum. We have the NDP, who again have their own think tanks and look at other viewpoints, but they have a very labor focus, no question about that, Madam Speaker. And on the other side, we have a strong business focus. But I believe the Liberal Party can best take the needs of both those parties and put it together in sensible legislation and in charting a course that sees the province of Nova Scotia or the country of Canada moving forward, because we're not adverse to looking at good ideas on the left and good ideas on the right and melding them together. We have no problem doing that because that is what's required. We cannot afford to be dogmatic and ideological, as Bill 102 actually does I think, present a very ideologically driven bill that that is forcing upon Nova Scotians a new system for first contract arbitration, first contract negotiation, which is completely unnecessary. And as I had said earlier, Madam Speaker, I think I could probably do that. Yeah. Yes, I think I was just talking about the time that's left to me, and I do believe that I have a little bit more to say on this bill before I'm done. So I wanted to assure my colleagues that won't be a problem. And I may not go 25 minutes, though, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, I'm particularly concerned about the impact that this has in terms of causing our employers in this province to feel a sense of unease, a sense that they're not in a province that's listening to them. They're not in a province that consults. They're not in a province that wants to ensure their prosperity. And I believe strongly that when business prospers, we all do better. When business is doing well, there's employment, then people feel secure. We know how the Canadian Federation of Independent Business does a regular survey of their members to see if they feel that they're going to be better off in the next year. Do they feel they'll hire more people in the next 6 months? How confident are they in their position? And sometimes they say, no, we're going to be downsizing our workforce, or we're frightened and we're not going to be expanding in any of our business activities. So they take that as a barometer for how the economy is doing. And I think that sending a signal like this Bill 102 sends is the wrong way for the government to move forward, because you're not sending out a signal that says we're listening to the employers of this province. And I'm not suggesting that the employers are more important or should have an undue influence. But I think that you have to have that balance that I spoke about, that the Liberal Party represents, a balance between union and worker interests and having fair rules for workers and our employees, and also making sure that those people who take a risk and those companies that are willing to invest here, that they also feel that they're in a positive environment, in a province, in a jurisdiction that's going to keep them. If we're going to go through a litany of anything, I think we should be looking at the job losses in this province. Exactly. If you want to hear a litany of what's going on, if you want a list, I have it in front of me, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there is a long list, and you've heard it from other members. You've heard about the level of unemployment. You've heard about the lack of growth in this province. You've heard about the jobs that have gone out the door, people either giving up or leaving this province. And that's very important. And the shipbuilding contract, which everybody is happy about, is really being diminished by the job losses everywhere else. And so as much as I'm happy to see thousands of new jobs come to this province, I don't believe that Bill 102 is going to do anything to protect the economy or grow those jobs or make this a stronger province. I think we're on a distracting sidebar in the history of Nova Scotia, a distracting sidebar for the union movement of this province, and it'll give you something, pardon me, it'll give the government something to boast about when you visit, when any members visit any union meetings. It does give a wonderful few speaking points for a speech to indicate that bills have passed this House that are union friendly. But this doesn't create a single job. Not one in this province, and it may prevent expansion, it may prevent investment, and it may prevent people from moving forward with their business activities. And that is what concerns me. And I think that's the issue that we need to be upset about here, and not going back into history and talking about things that are absolutely irrelevant in this current debate of Bill 102. Because the economy has prospered in the past in this province without this kind of legislation, and we need to see it prosper again. We need to stand strong while the rest of the world has their difficulties. It will affect our exports, and it will affect our other things in our province. But what's really important is to listen to the people who employ thousands and thousands of Nova Scotians. And if we don't listen to them, then it's been a complete sham. It's completely bogus. And I think, Madam Speaker, one of the things that was mentioned was that there was some consultation with business. And we were told that at least in one case, the CFIB made their presentation a week before this legislation was introduced in the House. Now, if they made a presentation to a group that was supposed to be a working group, and they made that 1 week before the law was actually presented here for the members to debate, it's pretty clear that there was no opportunity and no intention of integrating what was heard in that consultation into the bill itself. The bill was set in stone because it's, as I said, it's copied from Manitoba. Somebody worked in Manitoba and said, what a terrific idea, let's do what we did in Manitoba. Works really well. And you may say that Manitoba's doing fine. Well, it's quite a different place, isn't it? And it has a different history, and it has different employers. Oh, and immigration is a marvelous thing to raise about Manitoba because it does affect the economy, Madam Speaker. If we look at Bill 102, which is focused on the economy, we need people, and we need a place that people want to move to. And amazingly, Manitoba, with roughly the same population as Nova Scotia, has been able to attract 10,000 immigrants a year. In the 1990s, they had the same immigration level that we did here in Nova Scotia. And we fell from 3,000 immigrants down, and they have risen and risen and risen. And so, you know, they've obviously looked at the kind of initiatives that do something. Unlike a government right now sitting here in Nova Scotia, the government's doing nothing. They're bringing in pieces of legislation that are, you know, people have called them housekeeping. They're fairly meaningless pieces of legislation. And what we're saying on the Liberal side is there are significant problems on the horizon, and some of them are hitting us squarely between the eyes right now. And I'm talking about new page, I'm talking about, Bowater's concerns. I know that the Premier went there and witnessed their situation in Queens County. We have job losses in, let's begin. Well, we have Yarmouth, where hotels have closed, tourist industries have closed. We had the loss of jobs again with White Point Lodge, which had 100 people working there. I know that they will rebuild. I feel confident about that, but the job losses at Bowater are significant. New Page in Cape Breton, call centers in New Waterford, and I can go down the list. There's Compass in Atlantic, Larson's only a couple of years ago, Scanwood in Dartmouth. We can carry on if you want a litany of places that have been impacted both by the environment here in Nova Scotia and conditions as well that may have been outside the purview of Nova Scotia. But I think that the government of Nova Scotia owes it to the employers and the employees to protect the environment we have, which has been described as amicable, as tranquil, as positive in terms of labor management relations. And for an ideological an ideologically driven agenda to circumvent that and create instability in a time of great uncertainty is really irresponsible, Madam Speaker. And I feel that Bill 102 is exactly that. It's just unnecessary and it's superfluous at this point of time, and it can create some negative impacts. And if that's the case, then I think it should be abandoned, and we should all turn our attention to ways that this province can move forward and ways that we can get ready to position ourselves to be more competitive, because that's what's necessary. I'm frankly pretty tired of us being in this category where we're just not able to keep pace with the rest of Atlantic Canada, let alone the rest of the Canadian provinces. I'd like to see us become preeminent again in our region, and I would like to see the government set its goal to do exactly that. And right now, that's not happening. Madam Speaker, I believe that the bill, as I said, is a distraction, and that we should be looking at jobs and the economy. And I think that the other members who have spoken before me have done a very good job in outlining what those issues and problems are and where they are in the province. I think that the members of government understand that. We've heard about power rates. We've heard about gas prices. We've heard about issues that are impacting every Nova Scotian every day. And that's why their earning power is down, and that's why the taxes need to be adjusted. Our tax rates and our brackets need to be adjusted, and we need to have some innovative, thoughtful legislation coming forward from the government in order to position our province for its greatness. And I am disappointed that instead we have some justice bills that were 3 and 4 words practically. I think there were 54 words in total in 3 bills. Altogether, in those 3 justice bills, there's no reason why they couldn't have been combined. There are 3 education bills before us that, again, are small little tweaks and changes to the Education Act. Again, they could have been combined in 1 bill. And, Madam Speaker, what we're looking at then is an agenda which is designed to have a lot of bills so that at the end of the day, the number will be significant, that the government can say we did so well and worked so hard because we've passed, whatever number of bills. Really, there's no substance here, is what I'm trying to demonstrate. What we would like to see are some bills with more substance that are going to actually be just and right and in the public good, for the public good. Just exactly as Joe Howe said. I'm sorry to see the Minister of Communities, well, I'm sure he's listening. I have no doubt he is listening to what I have to say, because it is important. I really do honestly believe, Madam Speaker, that the Minister of Communities, being a brand new ministry and department, would be the ideal place to take up the charge for a Joseph Howe Day, where we can look at a person who set the parameters for good legislation. Like Bill 102, I don't believe it does meet those. I don't believe Bill 102 meets those parameters, and I am disappointed to see that it is the bill that is before us today, rather than something that's going to make life better for Nova Scotians. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. Pleased to have an opportunity today, in some ways, to rise and speak about Bill 102, the Trade Union Act. And Madam Speaker, I guess I want to start off by saying it's not about unions, that's for sure. quite a few years ago, I guess now as I think about it, I was a member of a union, and it was something that was introduced to us as paramedics. I can't remember the year, somewhere around 90, 91, maybe 92, something like that, doesn't matter. And there was a process that was in place, Madam Speaker, that was fair, a representative. After some discussion within our organization, we decided, well, maybe we need to have a union represent us, take our concerns to our then employer. Things were difficult in those days. The money was very small that we made. Very small, actually. We were paid by the call in those days, not by the hour. Just goes to show you how far we've come in this province, which I think is a great thing. But we decided we would talk amongst ourselves for a while, and we would decide if this was the right thing to do. We had 2 units, 2 operations, one in Sackville and one in Windsor, and we did do that. We had considerable discussion. It was fair, it was open. We talked about the good side of it and maybe what the bad side of it might be. Well, it ended up not to be too bad. We thought we'd talk to somebody else. So we gave one of our local unions a call through a connection of some friends that we knew. And we ended up talking to Ken Estabrooks at the Operating Engineers. Great fellow, Mr. Estabrooks. Around a long time, knew a lot about the union circles, knew a lot of the right people, knew how to get contracts negotiated, knew what the just of the labor laws were, knew the kind of simple things that were included in everyday contracts besides things like money and benefits. And in those days, as I said, we never had anything. We were making, by 92, I think we were up to $4 an hour, and the per call base went away. So the benefit for us, we thought, was increased wage, perhaps, a contract, maybe some gear to work with, things like that, stuff we never had. So we entered into some discussion with the Operating Engineers, and we became 921B, I think was our number at the time, and I think still is today, perhaps there. And of course, the Operating Engineers support and represent many, many, many different people in this province, Madam Speaker. So we get into that negotiation with Mr. Estabrooks and some of the people in that union, and we ended up signing our cards. And in those days, I think it was $2 to sign a card. I think today it's free, maybe, I hear. I don't know if that's right or not, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So we signed on, and of course our employer, he said, well, we're all going to lose our jobs. You can't afford to run a union operation. It's going to cost too much money, and so on and so forth. But we all know that it went on for a number of years after we were unionized, mainly because we didn't get a whole lot out of our contracts. That's probably fair to say. In those days, it was hard going. It was tough sledding. The negotiations went on for a lengthy period of time. But one of the things about it was we had a lot of input. We decided who the shop stewards would be through a process, which was fine. There was training provided. We agreed with, and I still do today, I want to make that clear, agreed with the opportunity to unionize and to sit down and discuss the things that were important to our organization when it came to what we needed and what we expected from a collective type bargaining in the end of the day, and coming out with a contract that would benefit us and our families and be something to begin what the future might hold in our industry. Because at that time, I'm not sure, the VG ambulance service was probably unionized, I think at the time, and I stand to be corrected on that, but I believe that they were. If there were any others, I don't think there were many at that time. It was something that was evolving, and certainly did evolve in the years after that and into the latter part of the 90s, when we saw the different unions that were representative by then come together and have a runoff vote and so on, and become what they are today, a very strong unit. But anyway, Madam Speaker, in getting back to that, I think it's important to note that there was a fair process in place. Although we didn't get everything we wanted, we never expected to, I guess, as well. We wanted what we thought was to better our working conditions, to better the vehicles we were driving, to better our wages to some degree, to try and find some benefits, which we did get. We got a little better wage. We got a health plan that was not so bad. It was a Blue Cross plan at that time, and that was pretty good in those days for an organization just starting out in the union world. And I say that because we came from nothing at all. I don't want to call it volunteer, but it was close to it, because there were organizations in this province that were driving a cab 1 minute, and the phone would ring, and then they'd go and park the cab and jump into an ambulance and go into a call. So that unionized environment created a number of opportunities which brought us where we are to date, which is a professional organization, one of the very best accredited organizations in North America. And we've seen that over and over through the reaccreditations. That is all because of the strength, I believe, of those early days when we decided we need someone to help us along. And that someone helping us along was the Operating Engineers Union, which we felt was good to us. Now, like I said, Madam Speaker, you don't get everything you want. You try to negotiate, and we felt that we negotiated fairly. And you would always argue, no matter what, that, you know, the boss, the owner of the company, they all have a job to do as well. There's only so much money. There's only so much profit that any company makes, and there's only so much that they can afford to pay for wages before they start laying people off or finding reasons to take trucks off the road. In this example, in and along 1992, and I remember that year well because it's the year I was married, and I should remember it well, I'm sure. Madam Speaker, you can appreciate that from where I come from. And having a house full of women, I can tell you right now, that's not something you forget, some of those more important moments in your life, times, years in your life when you're supposed to remember. This is all very relevant. So, Madam Speaker, in moving on, in 1992, there were a couple of us working in Windsor that had to be transferred, and we had to be transferred from Windsor to Sackville if we wanted to continue working, because we had a bit of a bargaining unit by then. We had a bit of a negotiation going on by then, and this was some of the tactic that was used at that time. And it's not uncommon. We know that when new organizations unionize, there's always this threatening feeling that people have, and sometimes employers like you to believe we can't afford you to be unionized. We can't afford it. In those days, like I said a few minutes ago, we made next to nothing in wages. We made $4 an hour by 1992. And we were one of, believe it or not, this is a true statement, we were one of the highest paid around in this province at $4 an hour. Hence the reason we worked 168 hours every 2 weeks before you worked any overtime. That's the reality of those days. Those days aren't that long past us, really. That was only 90s. Not that long ago. Yeah, it was 20 years ago, maybe a little more. Not long before that, in the town of Windsor, when you worked in the ambulance service where I worked, and it was not unionized, but there was a good group of guys there. 89, 90, you made $5 a call in town, $8 a call out of town, and you got a whole $25 to drive to Halifax and back. That was your salary paid. It was a whole mixed thing. So you can see where a union does have some points where they can step in here. They have the ability to bring something to your organization that no other can. We tried to organize as an association, and we were okay for a while, but you don't have any real stability now. You need somebody who knows what they're doing. And there's no question everyone in here is probably familiar with what a union can do and what a union has done and what unions do. We've seen disruptions and we've seen labor drive things. We've seen union and strikes, and believe me, in my world, in the EMS world from years back, I remember strikes. Those were very difficult times. And that's what happens when you work through some of those first collective bargaining. You want it to be fair. Unions have a place in the sectors, certain sectors, where you need them. Some large organizations who have been in the conditions that we have been in, that I've gone through in my working life, there was a benefit at that time to having the operating engineers and Ken Estabrook's, and I can't recall the other gentleman's name. There were multiple people who got us going, who organized us in a way that was strong. Experience and knowledge was just invaluable in those days, and there was a reason, as I said, to get there. Madam Speaker, there really was, because you couldn't live. It's hard to believe that we did live on $4 an hour, working those hours, and trying to raise a family. And the member right there walking in here from Sackville knows all about that. He was part of a few years later than that. He came along a few years later than that when things were really good. I think we were up to around $6 an hour then, maybe 6.5, Dave, somewhere there. And those times were still 168 hours every 2 weeks before you worked overtime. And I'm serious when I say before you worked overtime, because you worked overtime. You had to work overtime in those hours and that wage to make a living. Most of us, I think, were probably married by then. Some of us had families started by then. I think a lot of us did. And it's hard to believe, but as times change, you think back and you go, wow, how did we do that? Well, we did it because we had to do it. But we did it. And we did okay. In all honesty, we did all right. Our spouses usually worked. I know the honourable member from Sackville's spouse was working when he first joined our organization, and he could not probably have worked there otherwise to get by. And that's just the reality of those times. So it comes back to that organization and how things have transpired to some degree, Madam Speaker. And when I look at this, I think, okay, first contract arbitration, would that have done anything for us in those days? Probably not. Probably not. Wouldn't have mattered. Because what needed to be done, in I think all of our opinions, what needed to be done was we needed to learn. We didn't want to rush. We needed to know where we were going, and we needed to know what we wanted. The last thing I think that anybody wanted in those days was anybody just to walk in and go, bang, here you go, thanks very much, have a nice day. Everybody wanted more money. Everybody wanted better benefits. That's typical. That's, as every year goes by and the cost of living goes up and items are getting higher, and it doesn't matter what you're buying. In those days for me, in the mid to late 90s, it was diapers and milk and formula and all those things, just like it was a lot of my colleagues in those days. Today, it still is. That still goes on. Even more the cost, Madam Speaker. So we have to figure out why this bill is really worth even talking about on this floor of this legislature. Who has asked for it? We've heard these questions asked. We've heard a lot of debate over the last couple of days. I believe this started Friday last week and went into certainly last night. And it's been going all afternoon today, and it's probably going to continue on for some time yet as we see it. But, Madam Speaker, we have to ask what's wrong with the legislation. Why are we introducing it now? Times are economically quite tough. People will tell you it is good to have a job, although all of those people, Madam Speaker, would like to say we all want to earn more, we all want more benefits, we all want to have a nice home, we all want to have a nice car to drive to get back and forth to that job, we all want to be able to take a holiday. Wouldn't everybody just love that? Wouldn't that be great? Well, Madam Speaker, that we know that that's not the reality. I think about those statements, and I think about the people down in Bowater with the bad news in the last week or so. I think about certainly the people in Cape Breton, in Port Hawkesbury, where we visited back some time ago in September, and where that is all gone, with the hope, and that is what's left there, is a little bit of hope, Madam Speaker, that something will come of the potential new buyers in that facility in Port Hawkesbury. Hope is all they have left there. Hope is all we have left in this province, generally speaking, all around. With the number of jobs we've seen lost, people are asking, why aren't we focusing on some incentives to bring business here? This bill does nothing to focus on any incentive to bring anybody here. Now, the ship start here, we've heard about that contract. You know what? That's a great thing. They won that. We need to make sure that that gets done right, Madam Speaker. We don't have any options in that. We need every nickel of the billions of dollars that have been awarded on the merit of the fine people that are working at the Halifax shipyards and numerous other places in this province that will benefit and that will gain. We cannot afford to create any difficulties. We have negotiations, as I understand it, that this province will have to have with Ottawa and the completion of all the appropriate paperwork and time frames and all of the good bureaucracy that goes along with that to make that happen and to see people working. And what matters is going to be the first job that's hired, the second, the third, and the 100th, and the 1000th, and thousands of jobs beyond that, that we will see created because of that employment. That is a wonderful thing for this province, Madam Speaker. Luckily, or at least I hope, in some ways, we know down there that that's a unionized shop. They won't have to worry about first contract arbitration. But what about all the potential for spin-off and business incentives? The next thing that I would almost think that this province wants to do is go out to the borders and hang a great big sign that says Nova Scotia is open for business and you are welcome to come. And here's why you should come. But you know what? We don't have much to offer them. Under that sign, we also have to add, sorry, we have the highest taxes in the country. Not a good thing. It's a deterrence. Where are the incentives to bring business here? Now, I know that every member in this House wants Nova Scotia to thrive. I know that every member over there, whether they're sitting on the front bench, the back bench, or in the middle, want this province to survive. They want every town. They want every small community. They want everyone to be viable. They want businesses created. They want the spin-off. No matter what the spin-off is from that shipyard project, that's but one. And think of the years. How long is that going to go on? Years, potential. Generations, 2.5, 3 generations maybe, of people. There must be a great comfort that has been instilled in those people that are working in the shipyard today and those that have maybe been laid off for a period of time, that we may have some long-term hope in Nova Scotia with regards to shipbuilding. And we know what shipbuilding, the spin-off from that is just, well, it'll touch the entire province and probably the Maritimes and then some. Great benefits for this country to be investing, for the federal government to commit, Madam Speaker, to, I apologize for that, I thought it was off. Madam Speaker, I threw me right off there with the phone ringing. I want to get back to that, Madam Speaker. The federal government, to make a commitment, $25 billion, and it's almost hard to believe that here we are in the East Coast. Finally, we're seeing something with a positive spin on it happen in times that are tough, Madam Speaker. So getting back to Bill 102 and the potential for incenting jobs, but now we have a little controversy here, don't we? We have the potential to jam a bill through this House that has not been totally vetted. We say that we've talked to stakeholders and we've consulted. Well, there was a consultation that did go on, and I know the member from Inverness tried to get in on that consultation, but no. I think he was told something silly like there wasn't enough lunch, perhaps. We didn't know you were coming. Well, sure, he knew we were coming. It was a closed-door meeting to take the direction that the government wanted to go in, Madam Speaker, and that's not where we wanted to go. This process should be open. It should be transparent. Any legislation that comes through this House should be so open and so transparent. But what are we seeing? We've seen, I don't know what the total number of bills is, 20-something now maybe put forward in this House by the government. The majority of them, small housekeeping items. There are a couple of good bills there. I know the Minister of Transportation back a couple of weeks ago put a bill forward in this House with regards to safety. That was a fine bill. There's a reason to be here. There's a reason to put that bill through this House. There's a reason to be here. There is good legislation that can be passed, not just by government members, by all members of this House. And it's really unfortunate that part of the process of this House allows one party, the government party, to put forward a bill. Doesn't matter whether anybody else likes it or not, and it can happen without the proper consultation that we believe has not been done. But what's even worse, Madam Speaker, we can stand here and we can talk and talk and talk, and it's not going to matter in the end of the day because the government appears to be bound and determined to get this thing next door to law amendments, to bring it back and to put it through, and maybe we'll talk some more. I say maybe, I'm sure we're going to talk some more. Matter of fact, I know we're going to talk more on this bill. It's not just going to be that easy because the people have come to us. The small business community has come to us. The chambers of commerce have come to us, Madam Speaker. And I know that, I'm sure that all members have been copied on documentation that they provide, and I want to reflect on a little of that, and I'll table that when I'm done commenting from it. I won't read them word for word, but I will, Madam Speaker, if it's fine with you, I will, as per past practice, just maybe paraphrase a few of the comments in the letters that I read from, and then I'll table those. So we do have one, which is not unexpected, I'm sure, and it's from the CFIB, and it's with regards to the Labour Management Committee. And I'm just going to pick on a couple of highlights here. Now, they represent a pretty significant number, 5,200 members they have in this province, which is a large piece when you think about small business. And we're all quick to say, Madam Speaker, that small business, I don't know how many times I've heard this. I'm sure they've heard it thousands upon thousands of times. Small business is the backbone of our economy. We hear that at all levels of government. But yet, here we are hearing from them today. This one's dated back in October when all this first came out, and it's about the feedback will be of great interest. And they're talking about the Labour Management Review Committee, Madam Speaker. And they talked about the non-unionized small and medium-sized businesses and the very workplaces that will be impacted by legislation such as this is before us today in Bill 102. Some of their foremost concerns: the decision to prohibit the full and direct participation of non-unionized employers during those meetings. But yet we've said in this House, I've heard it said, that we have consulted. According to them, we haven't consulted maybe with all the people we should consult with, Madam Speaker. It's, in their opinion, being far removed from the process, and that is not how you get business in Nova Scotia done. Now, when you talk about incentives for business, wanting to be inclusive, wanting to include and gather important facts from business, Madam Speaker, you probably should talk to small business. It's like any other industry. It doesn't matter what it is, and it doesn't matter what bill we're going to put forward in this very chamber. We probably should be, when we say we're going to consult in great detail as much as we can with that particular industry. In this case, it is small business. And small business takes in just about everything you can imagine out there. And the most significant is that we still have not been provided with the satisfactory rationale for why legislation to settle first contracts is needed in Nova Scotia, nor has any compelling evidence been presented that indicates that first contract arbitration would improve labor relations in Nova Scotia. Now, we've heard the talk today and in past days, and we're going to hear it in future days, about the harmonious relationship that we've had over the years, Madam Speaker, and we've had, for the last 10 years or more, a good working relationship between unions and employers when it comes to bargaining. Now, I know from past experience, I spoke a bit about it, in my days in EMS, I kind of worked up through and did a variety of jobs, worked in different places around the province under collective agreements. And then somewhere in there, I don't know when it was exactly, I forget, late 90s, I guess I stepped out of the union role and went into a management role. Spent a number of years there. And because of the experience I had with union, I was asked to sit on negotiation committees on behalf of the company during those times. So it was great to be able to do that and to get experience with the union, negotiating and putting together agreements with harmony, trying to get through. And then it was great to get on the other side, on the management side, and say, all right, well, we know this side pretty good. We know the other side. You know, you're sitting there thinking, you talk about strategies, you're sitting there thinking, we know what they're going to talk about. We know what they're going to want. That's where the experience comes in, Madam Speaker. They already knew that I had the experience from being on the other side and that we knew what was going to come forward. We knew what was going to get brought forward because we knew the items that were hot items that are always of great interest to anyone in bargaining. And there's labor laws that say, and you can pick up multiple collective agreement, and it doesn't matter which it is, it'll point out all the standard labor practices that are generally included in any. And we always get down to the same thing. You negotiate and negotiate, and it goes on, and it gets stalled, and for whatever reason it takes some time. I've been part of agreements that have taken over a year to negotiate. But in the end of the day, it got passed, it got done, and I think it's probably a good thing that it took time, because you do need to give it the time that it needs. You need to go back to your membership, and you need to talk to your membership. And a lot of times, I was always of the opinion and felt that it didn't happen. It was more about the people at the table who were negotiating. Yes, they negotiate on your behalf. You've empowered them to do that. You've elected them as stewards. You've got a business person from the union that does that on your behalf. But not always do you feel as an employee or a bargaining unit employee in the union that you're fully represented, because your opinion may vary from theirs. And that's just human nature. We know that that happens. We know that not 100%. It would be very rare if there were 100% of the people ever, when presented a contract, would go, yep, that sounds good, thanks very much, we're going to take that. I'm not aware of any that's happened. That's fair process, that's fine. All the more reason you don't go in and rush through something and say, bang, there you go. And in this case, a first contract arbitration, that's what you'd have. You'd go, here's your contract, Madam Speaker, there it is, thanks very much. Doesn't matter whether you like it or you don't, here it is. Instead of taking the time, working harmoniously with the employer, and I know that that is, believe me, that can sometimes be difficult. And I would have argued in those days back in my early days in EMS when I worked for a particular company that, although we had respect for our employer, it was difficult. But in thinking back over those years, it was difficult for them probably too. There wasn't big money in that operation. Today we're into 100 million plus, and maybe the Minister of Health would know the number right off the top of her head about what emergency health services the budget is for this province. In those days, believe it or not, it was near $14 million. We are a long, 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 long way past $14 million today. Again, we have one of the very best anywhere in the world. There's no doubting that, and we take great pride in that. And I can tell you that I am proud to have been part of that organization, to have been part of negotiating some of those contracts, both on the labor side and on the management side, Madam Speaker. It is a great, great experience that you can, thank you, that you can only get from being there. But what I'm getting at here is there was value in that, Madam Speaker, because you took the time to go through it. You took the time that it needed. You went through all of the issues. And anyone that's ever sat at the table and negotiated a contract, and I'm sure there are people in here that have probably been in that position, at least I think there would be, whether you were a teacher or whether you were whatever. Doesn't matter what industry you came from. If you were in a unionized environment, I'll table that one document there, thank you. If you were in a unionized environment, Madam Speaker, you would have some experience, in all likelihood, at how negotiations go. You come together, you sit and what are all the things that matter to us? And in the beginning, there's a great big long list. And then you soon start adding all the standard contracts or the standard clauses that would be in a contract. And there's a lot of them. There really is quite a few of them. Hence the reason some of them are pretty thick. I think our first contract was something like, our first contract was something like 10 or 11 pages long, and it was like this. And it probably had bigger print, and it wasn't on both sides. That was our first contract. But we learn from that, of course. You know, that's your first time through, and you try to get better, and you're always adding to try to make life a little better. You're looking for that extra benefit. You're looking for the extra dollar. But having been there on both sides of that, and anyone here that has been there would know, it's the last thing in the world you ever want to rush. And in my opinion, having been on both sides of this, the last thing that you would ever want to do in a very new contract, after a group that's just organized, who've never been there before, who've never been part of a union ever before, here they are. They're in, they're not shocked, but they're going, all right, we're feeling pretty good, you know, maybe we've got some strength, we're going to get something going our way, but we don't know what that is. What is our way? Well, you're just going to be told, here you go, bang, and it doesn't matter who likes it or who doesn't. That's the unfortunate part about it. Now, I strongly believe in the collective bargaining process. I have no problem with the door being open and someone walking in and said, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I'm with, you know, the brotherhood of this or the sisterhood of that or the union or an association. All of those things are important. That's democracy in this country. Madam Speaker, that's what, as we celebrated not too long ago here, a week or so ago, Remembrance Day, that's what them fine people fought for, was that democracy. They fought for the right to be able to stand up and say, I won't mind, you know, I'll take part in the union. I want to hear what they got to say. They fought for the right to negotiate that contract. That's the freedom to do that, not to have something shoved down their throat, Madam Speaker. That's not what they fought for. They fought for democracy. And this bill moves away from democracy, in my opinion, and in others. You've heard them speak in the last few days on it. You'll hear them speak more. As I've said, we've got a long way to go yet. But it is important, Madam Speaker, to remember that the union has a role. Nobody's disagreeing with that. But there is a free and democratic process called negotiations that must be allowed to take place. You can't not have that. You have to have people sit down, you have to have ideas brought forward, and it's not just about the hourly wage. That's a huge part of it. Finance piece is always the big part. It's the clincher. It's the one that takes you long hours and days and weeks, months sometimes, to get through. First ones, to me, are probably the most vital. They are the ones that you have to take your time on. You can't rush them. There are many small business owners who right now are a bit fearful of where this might take us. We're hearing from them. We know that the government may not, you know, they'll pass that off and say, well, no, it's not going to have any impact. But sometimes when you're putting a bill through and you want to be right, and you believe that you're right, and that's your philosophy in life, you think that's okay. But there are an awful lot. I mentioned a few minutes ago that the CFIB represents 5,200 members, and they don't represent them all. There are thousands of small businesses that are not part of the CFIB. I know that they're working to get under that fold and to become part of that and to be well represented. And then there are other people out there, just individuals, who are small business owners who might own a music store, for example, Madam Speaker, who might say, you know what, I have 3 or 4 employees, we're not busy, times are tough, we're going to have to let 1 or 2 go. Now, we heard from people in the past when minimum wage went up, there was a great argument then. You know, small business owners, although they believed in their employees and they wanted to be able to pay good wages, sometimes they didn't have the wage to be able to pay good wages. And what we have seen, unfortunately, although I support very much good wages being paid in this province, because as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when I started this debate, that I came from a world where wages were next to nothing. And Madam Speaker, we all know what it takes to live these days with the increased cost of everything. So I talked to these small business folks. I ran into a guy this morning on my way here, and I was chatting with him for a few minutes, and he wasn't even aware, sort of. He asked me, he said, what's on for today? I said, well, I'm heading to Halifax. He said, what are the big issues? And I said, well, to the opposition and to our party and to myself, it's Bill 102. What's that? Of course, he didn't know. Right? In all fairness, he didn't know. One of these guys who's a busy guy. He's in the TV business of all things, if you can imagine. He works for Eastlink. What's that mean? You know, you're telling them a bit about how we perceive it, and here's where you can get the bill. Read it for yourself. So, you know, trying to be fair. Some would say, no, you're just giving them your side. No, not at all. We want you to make a judgment, because that's what the people who have written us and who have called us and who have emailed us and who run into us in the street or talk to us in Tim Hortons or talk to us in the businesses that we visit. We've said, read it for yourself. Understand it. What does it mean to you? Some may say it doesn't mean anything. We've heard from an awful lot who says it means a lot to us. What will it mean? The scary part is they don't know what it means because they feel they're not going to have an opportunity to negotiate a contract. If, in fact, this drives small business into more organized businesses, such as being represented by unions, Madam Speaker. Now, there's nobody right now that's going to jump up over on the other side, I'm sure, and say, Madam Speaker, that, okay, we're putting this bill forward in the hopes of unionizing every business in the province. I don't think there's anybody over there that's going to stand up and say that. And I'm not going to stand here and say it either, because I'm not sure that that's the intent. But what the intent is going to have happen is people are going to look at this. That can happen now. The members is right. You can unionize, and I spoke to that. If you were listening to my debate a few minutes ago, my comments, you would know that we decided that on our own in those days because we felt we needed to do that.
Order, please. I just want to remind the member to speak through this to the speaker as opposed to the members on the opposite side of the floor. Thank you. The honourable member from Hants West has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate that little reminder to just keep me on my toes. That's just fine. Thank you. Appreciate that. But we did speak to, Madam Speaker. We did organize ourselves. We got our own group together because we felt we needed to. There was no choice, and I would argue even today that that is why we are, those fine ladies and gentlemen that are working in the streets today as paramedics are where they are. The people, the good people working in communications are where they are. They're represented. They've had strong representation. And I'm sure every employer, I know that my former employer wasn't the most excited when we signed union cards. He was mad. There's no question, because he saw the end of the line for him. He saw we were going to break him, that we wanted to take everything he had. Well, believe me, Madam Speaker, there wasn't much to take. There wasn't much to take at all. But we felt that we could be treated a little better. We felt that we could at least be given a pair of boots and maybe a pair of pants, maybe an extra $1 an hour on our pay, but that didn't come for an awful long time. But it was because we negotiated, and we did it in good faith. And some would argue that they didn't do it in good faith, but we did it in good faith. And we did end up, years down the road, after multiple contracts, after a new ownership came along. And I often said, and I'm by no means a Liberal, but I often said through the mid-90s, when the Liberals were in government in this province, there was a gentleman who was the minister at the time who saw fit to take us where we are today. And if it hadn't been for Mr. Stewart, that's correct. If it hadn't been for Ron Stewart, I dare say that the governments that came afterward and that will come afterward, and the people of this province would not be very well served by that particular legislation and changes and allowing this system to be brought into the 21st century, and in those days, the 20th century, and where it needed to be, because we were behind. We were way behind. But unions have helped form and shape that. We don't disagree with that. Again, I was a long-time union person. I don't disagree with that. But what I do disagree with is the pretense of this bill that says you're going to tell me what I'm going to get right away. I have no option. I want to be able to sit down at that table, and I want to be able to say, what do we have today? And I want to be able to say, where do I want to be tomorrow? And where do I want to be next year? And where do I want to be in 5 years and 10 years? And as my family grows, and life changes, and the cost of everything goes up, including electricity, and you name it, taxes continue to rise, governments come, governments go. We know what happens. You never know what's going to happen. But one thing, through a fair, open, and transparent negotiation in good faith, just the patience of time, will allow you to have the majority of that membership that are union members say, yeah, we can accept that because this is a good deal for us. Now, we've seen some pretty significant deals that are important to mention here, I think, Madam Speaker. And those deals like the police officers, I believe they're 10-year contract. There may be some other examples. I'm not sure if the HRM Fire, how long, as an example, their contracts are, but there are some history of long-term negotiated contracts. Where would you be if you were forming a pretty significant operation with a lot of people? I mean, these people, obviously, they employ hundreds of people, but there's a lot of other industry in this province that employs hundreds of people. We want to bring more of that here. How do you incent them by saying, oh yeah, great, we'd love to have you. Love to have you come in, and we'd love to have you set up. And as soon as you can put 200, 300, 50 people, I don't care if they're putting one person to work. Those are all important jobs in this province, whether they're in Cape Breton, or in Preston, or in Windsor, or in Yarmouth, or in Shelburne, or anywhere in this province. Every single job matters today in this province. Every single job, Madam Speaker. They're all important. Which one of them employers, though, want to open up a business? And I keep thinking about the spin-off and the opportunity from the ship start here. And thankfully, they are going to start here. But I think when, we hear an awful lot about this, and it's going to be, all right, what business can I get into where I might be able to do pretty good as a business owner? And I can employ some people. Maybe there's some government incentive somewhere down the road, whether it's a federal program or provincial program or whatever it might be, Madam Speaker. It doesn't matter. Or maybe there's just a real good opportunity because the time is right. There's $25 billion and everybody wants a piece of it. That's great too. What if I want to be a contractor and I want to build houses in Hants County? You know what? We're an hour outside in that circle. Not everybody's going to want to live in downtown Halifax. We know that. I can tell you there are a number of people moving out of the HRM, moving to Falmouth, moving to 3 Mile Plains, moving to Murdoch, moving all over. Because of taxes. There's no question. All of those things matter. Why? Because it's a pocketbook issue. What have we been seeing? Governments like to put their hand in your pocket, and if you've got a few cents left, Madam Speaker, they want that too. That's what they want. You need to do better. We need to do way better than where we are today. So if I wanted to set up a business, I'm going to build houses out there. Great, because there's probably going to be a demand. We're hopeful there's going to be a demand. We want a little piece of the $25 billion. I can offer maybe 50, 25, whatever the number is, employees an opportunity for multi-years of work, whether it's building new houses, fixing old houses, the reconstruction, laying floors, putting in new windows, as over time we know that there are programs, which are great programs, to replace such things. That's all good. But who's going to want to start that up and think, okay, I'm going to put 25, 30, 50 people, Madam Speaker, into a position, job, and then maybe there's a risk. What's the risk? Well, the risk is, well, you could unionize. Well, that wasn't a risk before because now the employer isn't going to have the opportunity that he or she needs or they need in the long term to sit down and negotiate over time in good faith, an agreement that will be of value, not just to the employee, but to the employer. And if we don't have the value going, some value going into that employer, they're not going to be here. There's no reason to be here. They're not going to work their whole life for nothing. That's not right either. We as employees don't want to work every day for nothing. We want to work, we want this, and we want that. Well, that's okay, that's human nature. Business people have needs too. They have families, they have expenses, whether it's shops or trucks or hammers and nails, whatever it is, there's expenses. Madam Speaker, we have to realize that that negotiation is vitally important. You can't walk away and introduce something that doesn't allow for fair, open, and transparent negotiation when it comes to the labor workforce. Now, for whatever reason, somebody's decided in their infinite wisdom, oh yeah, we can do that in Nova Scotia. That's okay. Doesn't matter. Now, we've got a lot of documentation. I haven't even got a chance to touch on part of it, and I haven't even got a chance to look at my notes, unfortunately, Madam Speaker. So that's okay, though, because I know I'm going to have another opportunity as we move forward. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for other members to talk, and I'm hopeful. What I'd really like to see is if the government has such a solid, well-founded, consultative process where they want to stand up and they want to talk for an hour or a couple hours, we've got nothing but time. Because, Madam Speaker, this is a bill that needs to get through in full. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be debated. If there's an opinion that they want to offer, great, we're open to hearing it, just like they're listening to ours right now. But they're not in it. It's not really a debate. I guess it's sort of a one-sided debate, unfortunately. Again, how is that good for anyone here? How is that good for Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker? It is not good for Nova Scotians. This bill is the wrong direction at the wrong time. The free, the fair, the open, the democratic society that's been in place through negotiations of past days has worked fine for years and years and years and years. It's fair to both sides. We come out with numbers that are generally high when there's an agreement. Yes, it takes time, but time is okay. Time gives you time for the second sober thought and not to be too anxious, not to do something that's going to hurt the employer or the employee. Don't cripple something before it even gets underway. Don't cripple things that have been in place for years. Give it the time that it needs, Madam Speaker. That's all that people are asking. Madam Speaker, I guess looking at the time, and how much time do I have left, Madam Speaker?
Have 18 minutes?
Oh, I've got lots of time yet. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I know it's getting late in the day.
I'm sorry, no.
No?
13 minutes.
13 minutes, thank you. I'll just go a couple more minutes, Madam Speaker, and then perhaps adjourn debate for the afternoon and look forward to picking it up on Thursday. So, Madam Speaker, like I said, we've had numerous letters come in, people expressing their unhappiness about how that Labour Management Review Committee has operated, how it's not been inclusive. Now, this is now a government who sat on the opposition, and we heard the words inclusive, we heard about fairness, and we heard any number of those words, and democratic that you can imagine. Now, it's not that far to walk across that floor, Madam Speaker, not that far. But a lot changes when you get over there, it seems. Promises are made, promises aren't kept. No taxes increased, taxes up. We want you to come and work, but yet we're saying we're going to make it more difficult. That doesn't seem fair to me, Madam Speaker. I'll end just quickly today with the words that I know that they don't want to hear, and that is, this is not fair to Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker. This is the wrong legislation. I hope when this gets over to law amendments, and I know that it will at some point, that we have a lot of people coming in, the people that are contacting us. I hope they stand up and they say, this is why. It's not just the Tories, it's not just the Libs and the opposition who are here talking about why this isn't good for the business community. It's not just us rambling on for hours after hours and trying to get their points across, because that's what we're doing. We are doing more than rambling. We are here on their behalf. Those are the people that we represent, Madam Speaker. I look forward to coming back on Thursday and our next day and picking this up, having much more discussion and hearing others. But given the hour of the day today, I will move to adjourn debate, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much.
Thank you. The motion is to move adjournment of debate 102. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that ends the government's business for today. We will now rise to sit the hours of 2 to 6 p.m. tomorrow, which will be the official opposition Liberal Party's business. So I'll now hand it over to the acting House Leader.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Member for Preston to call official opposition business for tomorrow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our business tomorrow will be resolution number 2389 and resolution 2245. I move the House adjourn now. Sit tomorrow.
Thank you. The motion is that we now rise to meet again tomorrow, November the 23rd, between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We've now reached the hour of interruption, and I will call under Rule 5.5 the resolution as read earlier today, put forward by the Honourable Member for Cape Breton West, which reads, therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly require the Minister of Finance to take leadership on this important issue and find an immediate resolution to the Auditor General's concerns. I recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This resolution has called upon the members of this House to require the Minister of Finance to take leadership on this important issue and find an immediate resolution to the Auditor General's concerns. Last week, as part of the Auditor General's report, we learned that the Auditor General was prevented from doing his work, from their office doing their work at the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board. And more disturbing than that, we learned that the Minister of Finance wasn't going to do anything about it. It appears the Minister of Finance does not trust the Auditor General. And if we look at what was said, and I can certainly table this, Madam Speaker. It comes from the Auditor General's most recent report, dated November 2011, on page 63, and it says the department's response. They said that the uncertainty revolves around whether the Auditor General's offices are actually authorized to exercise discretion in maintaining the confidentiality of certain operator information once in the Auditor General's hands. So it's essentially saying that, that the Minister doesn't trust, because that is the Minister's department, that the Minister does not trust the Auditor General with the safety of that information. Now, the Auditor General last week told reporters that I must report with disappointment that one agency of government, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, denied to us access to information we needed to conduct an audit of that federal provincial body. That denial came at the instruction of the operators of Nova Scotia's offshore gas developments, ExxonMobil and Encana, and it places the board in contravention of the Nova Scotia Auditor General Act. More to the point, it is contrary to the principles of open and transparent government, principles I believe to be fundamental tenets of good government. The Auditor General also said that we are unable to provide assurance to the legislature or the people of Nova Scotia that the board is properly meeting its regulatory responsibilities to ensure that offshore activities are conducted safely, with due regard for the environment and protecting the interests of the public, the ultimate owners of the resource. The Auditor General said, we believe the exercise of these responsibilities should be open and transparent. It is not. So those are pretty firm words from the Auditor General. And the Auditor General also said, I'm quoting an awful lot here, Madam Speaker, but it's all relevant, and it starts out, what is relevant is that we did not conduct the audit because the board refused, that being the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, refused to provide a large part of the information we requested, unless we agreed not to disclose it without permission from the operators. They feel they can legally do this. I do not agree. As a matter of principle, I will not conduct an audit in which the subject of the audit is able to dictate what I can disclose in my report. So, Madam Speaker, in opposition, our Minister of Finance lectured government day in and day out about the importance of transparency. But in this case, he suggests the best remedy is for the parties involved to go to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. I believe the best remedy here, Madam Speaker, would be for the Minister of Finance to show some leadership and use his authority as Minister and start acting in the public's interest. The Minister said in question period recently that it is in the public interest that mechanism, being the Supreme Court, should now be used so that this dispute can be resolved as quickly as possible. And that means going to court. And anybody with a passing knowledge of the court system knows that going to court is certainly not the fastest way to resolve an issue. The Auditor General later said the Minister is wrong. In fact, he said that he talked to the Minister about this issue and thought he would know better than to suggest court as a remedy. So, and Madam Speaker, those aren't my words, those are the words of our trusted Auditor General, the individual and the office in this province that looks out to ensure that, that government is operating as it should be and that the dollars of taxpayers are being spent wisely. So, the Minister of Finance spent many years on the opposition benches on this side of the House, and he often believed he knew better than everyone else about how government should work. Now that he sits on the other side of the House, it appears he thinks the government should shrug off its responsibilities, and he believes the best remedy in this situation is for the parties to go to court. Well, Madam Speaker, this is very important. This whole issue of the Auditor General being able to audit the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, because that board is responsible for three important things: our environment, the safety of people working in the oil and gas industry, and royalties. Now, we look at, we've seen incidents around the world of oil and gas activity causing environmental damage. Accidents happen, but you know, Madam Speaker, we have to do our best to ensure that accidents don't happen. Some people would say that accidents don't happen, that it's always a result of some kind of happening that could have been prevented. I will say in this legislature that it is government's responsibility to do its best to take an active role. And if we're doing that active role through the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, then why not have the Auditor General go in there and have a look to make sure the board is looking after our environment when it comes to oil and gas development in this province. The second thing this board looks after is the safety of workers. And I don't think we need to debate that. Safety of workers is obviously important, and if the industry, I know the industry would have a lot of good practices already, because most businesses in the oil and gas industry recognize the importance of having safe workplaces, because they need a good productive workforce, and they don't need incidents of people getting hurt to tarnish the reputation of the industry. And of course, for the obvious reason that I'm sure they don't want to see their workers getting hurt. So, Madam Speaker, the third item that this board is responsible for, and why we believe that the Auditor General should be able to review the board, practices of the board, and the reason why we believe the Minister of Finance should facilitate the Auditor General in being able to do that, is royalties. And without the Auditor General's audit, how do we know if the production and royalty reports that come to government from the oil and gas industry are actually accurate? Who is doing a back check? It's quite possible the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board is doing an excellent job. However, that needs to be verified. That's the Auditor General's job. The Auditor General wants to do his job, but a Minister of Finance will not facilitate that. So, and Madam Speaker, those royalties have, I know it sounds like a small number, but I know those royalties in the past have represented about 2% of the province's revenue. And we talk about balancing budgets, and we talk about a government that's raising taxes, HST being one notable, to increase revenues. Well, royalties from our oil and gas are a significant component of revenues for the province. Why isn't the Minister of Finance making sure that we're getting our fair shake? Madam Speaker, how much time do I have left?
Just 1 minute.
Okay. I'm going to have to move ahead a little bit here. So I think to wind down, we believe that the Auditor General is correct and that the Minister of Finance should change his position on this matter. How can the Minister stand with the Auditor General when he says things that he agrees with, but stand against the Auditor General if something comes about, like this situation, where the Minister disagrees with the Auditor General? It is wrong to stand on the sidelines and wait to see what a court will direct. This is not a theoretical argument. The Offshore Petroleum Board regulates health and safety of our workers, protects our environment, and of course looks to make sure that our royalty rates that the province is getting are accurate, that we're getting our fair share from the industry. It is in the public's best interest to know that these functions are being performed adequately. If they are not, that action is being taken. If they are not, an action is not being taken to protect the environment or the petroleum resource stakes that we deserve, then the Auditor General can I think I'll wrap it up by saying that our caucus is urging the Minister of Finance to take action and play a leadership role to ensure the resolution of this dispute between the Auditor General and the Offshore Petroleum Board. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax, Chebucto.
Thank you very much. This entire issue is a discussion for lawyers. Now, we can have the discussion here, and to a certain extent we will, but really it should take place in the courts. The courts are the best place to resolve all of the issues that have been identified in this motion and have been identified in other discussions that have been associated with the issue. There is an ambiguity in the resolution that has been put forward that has not been resolved by the comments of the previous speaker. The resolution says that the Minister of Finance shall take leadership on this important issue. Now, there are two possible interpretations